Corruption is always a major cankerworm with the most devastating effect on the economy of any nation as it permeates all fabrics of the society in its ever-destructive stride. Nigeria as a nation has for far too long suffered from the devastating blow from corruption, the result of which has over the years plunged the country's development drive into a deep quagmire. It is against this backdrop that the Buhari administration has since coming into office given the fight against corruption a top priority attention, and the whistle-blowing formula in the vanguard for a new Nigeria has increased the tempo of success by the day. Moment for Thought puts all these under close examination with eminent Nigerians in our studio. General IBM Haruna, Officer of the Order of the Federal Republic, OFR. General Haruna was a Minister of the Federal Republic and now a private legal practitioner. Also with me in the studio is Professor Femi Odekunle, a Professor of Criminology and the first in the country, and former Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, Abuja Zaria. Professor Femi Odekunle is currently member Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, and I am Aliyu Barau. You're welcome. You're welcome, General.
Thank you. Good evening.
And Professor, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, let me start with the General. You saw Nigeria as a colony, and later a sovereign state from First Republic. Up to this particular time, you were a minister. You held several posts, public offices, and fundamentally, when you served the nation, you helped to bring the country together when you cast back our memory of the Civil War. And today, Nigeria is the giant of Africa, and they say it's the giant economy on the African continent. Corruption that so many people see as the bane of the country's development, and the dogged stride by the current administration to do something about it. How do you see the scenario now, flashing back on Nigeria's development drive and experience as a nation?
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying, fortuitously yesterday, I saw a television program where River State was celebrating its golden anniversary. I believe some few days earlier or weeks, Lagos State did the same. Now that marks 50 years of one of the steps the military had taken towards reconstructing Nigeria. 50 years earlier, or thereabouts, or let's say 2 years ago, we celebrated our centenary as a nation. So we've been on for 100 years. In those days, the social values that were instant remained intact. Over time, these social values have decayed, and we ask ourselves why. And I think that the decay of our social values have led to corruption. And corruption has led to our stunted economic or political development. We valued our people in those days where the rule of law was then perhaps dictated and decided by the ruler and his council. At certain times, they were dictatorial or arbitrary. However, over time, we have come to the new civilization where we attempt to grow and develop under the principles of democracy,
yes,
under the principles of electoral democracy. And as a result, one expected that the people will be properly represented and that development program will accord to their hopes and aspirations. As a result, corruption has eaten deep into the society. It has destroyed the social values that made it possible that when you drop any material value, it will be made public for you to claim it. It was so possible that if you were stranded, you will get assistance from your neighbor or from a passerby. Now, most people are afraid to render help to somebody who is in pain because they may become accused of the act. And that is because the society now lives on continuous suspicion of each other. Because of the derailing value system that we used. Okay, let me come to Professor Femi Odekunle. I think, do I say you know it all about criminology because it's crime when you really steal public funds? Corruption is all-encompassing. It's not just stealing public funds, even attitudinal, as you now listed. And today you are a member of Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption. How have you seen the model too, let me call it in code, the model of corruption that we have today, and the way to deal with the situation? Are we on the right track?
Certain fundamentals have been responsible for the situation we are in. And the major one has to do with the contradiction of the ethos that used to guide our society. The ethos that used to guide this society until about the late 70s had to do with the collective interests overriding individual interests. And when you have that ethos, that's like a principle, like a philosophy, like an ideology of how you relate to one another, whether government to people, people to people, obas and emirs to chiefs, teachers to lecturers. The interest of the collective must always override that of the individual. And that used to be the ethos that guided our relationship. But it was eroded gradually by the colonial and Western economic system. And then our elites, who then inherited this, perhaps carelessly, allowed that emergent material conditions to destroy our conditions of social relations. Now, you are in a situation whereby, as of today, the problem is that individual interests dominates collective interest, and it's reflected in your governance, in your leadership, in your laws, in your law enforcement, in your sanctioning of offenders, and in your approach to virtually all things. That's why you find that in the educational system, unlike when I was a young man, the federal government schools, the public schools, were more productive than private schools. Now the private schools are the ones people are anchoring after. You see now, government houses, buildings, estates were more preferable, those GRAs, than personal houses. Now it is personal houses that are better than government estates. In almost every area, when government says they're having agricultural farms, they are never productive. But when individuals have their own private farm, so that is to show you that this ethos of individual interest dominating collective interest is what has perverted situation. And when you now talk, and when you have that kind of situation, people cannot legitimately, using legitimate income, acquire, accumulate, and accumulate, and accumulate. So you have to use illegal, illegitimate means. That explains the behavior of your public servants. Yes. That explains the behavior of those in the private sector, whereby, for example, a bank is about to become bankrupt, but the executive directors and the chairman are getting bonuses in millions, if not billions.
So it's not just government.
It's
all
not
fabrics
just
of the society.
Yes, officers
as you said,
society.
Contradictions of the ethos that guide our life as a nation.
That has affected, for example, even the interpretation of democracy, the so-called rule of law, the separation, the way people interpret them, they are good principles. They were reasons why they were historically put there by the British that colonized us. And we are supposed to also appreciate those principles. But what has happened is that these ethos I talked about had permeated their interpretations to the extent that when you talk about separation of powers, people are no more interested in the principle of it and the advantage, but the benefit, they abuse it. They abuse the demands of democracy, they abuse the rule of law, they abuse fair hearing, even the principle of you are innocent before you are proven guilty, which is not appropriate for the crime of corruption. People emphasize it for their own interest. They emphasize it for themselves, but not for when somebody stole a goat or is alleged armed robber. Can you see how your National Assembly quickly passed death penalty for kidnappers? How come they have not passed death penalty for corruption all this year? And we know corruption is the one destroying us. Like Buhari said, and everybody agrees, and we have said it even before he said it, that if we do not kill corruption, corruption will kill us.
Yes.
But what has your assemblies, National Assembly or states have done to manifest their aversion to that crime that is going to ruin us if we are not careful, because they have been ruining us?
So it's all about collective responsibility, even among the institutions of democracy, not only them.
Pursuit of collective interest.
Pursuit of collective interest. When you're talking about Nigeria as a nation, especially the fundamentals of the principle of social contract, it's a symbiotic relation between the
That is what has destroyed the moral fiber.
Yes. Talking about destruction of the moral fiber, of the ethos that guide us as a nation.
There are variables determining and ascertaining interests. And because these interests are contesting and conflicting amongst themselves, there has to be checks and balances. And representing these interests, political parties in a democracy that we are trying to practice are the collation of the variety of interests. And they are enthroned to govern through the processes of credible election. So underlying the morality involved in government, in good governance, there must be the application of the law, the constitutional law, the procedural law, the human laws that underline our beliefs. It may be religious or customary. And I believe that we have to protect ourselves and guide ourselves through checks and balances, not just the branches of government, but also its agencies, as well as private organizations. If private organizations and governments fail because there are no checks, credible checks, and balances, then people go wild with their personal interests, and they abuse the law. They abuse the opportunity. They cease to have the integrity, the honesty with which they are supposed to perform. The end result is that you have the threat of anarchy, of conflicts, of terrorism, so on and so forth.
Yes.
Lack of peace and lack of development. And I believe that the change mantra of the government and the present steps being taken, which must start from somewhere by the agencies of government, are in the right direction, because otherwise we are getting to the point where you cannot avoid all these evils that will defeat law and order and civilized development.
Yes. Well, this, when you're talking about the checks and balances, not only the public sector, what I mean is government among governments, the institutions of democracy, even individuals. You talk about good neighborliness and what have you. So we can check ourselves, especially what manifested from the whistleblowing formula, so to speak. And now from your committee's angle and your observation of the society, how, just as you said, is this a right step in the right direction? Do you see it that way?
I'm saying this not just because I'm a member of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, but as a social scientist, as somebody who has studied this since about 1980, that in fact I delivered a pre-inaugural lecture for now last December, in which I did a summary of the fight against corruption in Nigeria, the journey to date. And when you do a status report, you will see that the fight against corruption has been up and down, and that it has not been sincere, particularly in the last administration. But that with this administration, there is one of the major missing elements in the fight, which is political will and determination, leadership by example, are coming. And to that extent, it is in that direction because we have the effect of the reputation of General Buhari, his pronouncements, certain policy measures like the TSA, the energization of the anti-corruption agencies like EFCC, ICPC, even the police now. Then, of course, we have our committee, which is like an intellectual think tank of the matter. We issue advisories. We do engagement with anti-corruption agencies and other agencies prone to corruption to try to change their orientation, their perception, and achieve a kind of paradigm shift in the way they think about corruption. And we develop tools to help prosecutors, to help enforcement, to help judges appreciate the situation. And in other words, to try to institutionalize, as it were, these things. And if anybody say we are not in the right direction and that we are not, that the administration is not making headway, let me give you one. There are many indices all over but let me give you one index. A lot of our elites, they are agents of the devil. They worship money. That means they worship mammon. How come now they are now depositing those monies in all kinds of places and then denying the ownership? That shows you there is what going on.
But some they say is a gift.
Now, but Yoruba people have a proverb: who doesn't know how to take meat, put it in the mouth and say, I didn't know where it went. So that is not the issue. But again, before we go, I must agree that there are constraints that is affecting the work of the administration against corruption. For example, I mentioned earlier on the abuse of democracy, the abuse of the rule of law. General talked about law and checks and balances. I smiled. We are from different backgrounds. Disciplinary is in law. I'm a social scientist, a criminologist. In fact, one of the hoax, deception of the legal system we have inherited is the attribution of arbitrary equality to people who are substantially, economically, socially unequal. You see, the law says we are equal before the law. That's arbitrary attribution of equality. But in reality, economically, socially, politically, we are unequal. And so when you apply the law, that is what you are having in the matter of corruption. That they are not able to deal with them as they deal with ordinary burglars, thieves, robbers, murderers. Because the socioeconomic class of those who are prone to perpetrate corruption are similar to those who are to enforce and administer it.
Yes.
And a revolutionary approach to fight against corruption must appreciate this limitation of the legalistic approach to the fight against corruption.
So
I'm sorry to say, the fundamental issue is that everybody is treated equal for the search of opportunity of what exists. And the primary thing I think that we are fighting against was captured in His Royal Majesty, His Eminence's speech. And he said, we have programs, we have budgets, we have leaders on how to curb poverty, the growing effects of poverty. In fact, poverty is underlying all the objectives that is leading us to the search for an equitable or equal society
Yes.
in context. Because creation is unequal to start with.
Yes.
Races are unequal with different attributes.
Yes.
So the unequalness has a fundamental, basic objective to bring about some equity.
Yes.
Equity gives you equal opportunity to vie for opportunity. But this is being subverted. It's being subverted because people are not sincere, they lack the honesty, they lack the integrity in the formulation or execution of policies.
Yes.
The promises they make when they have the opportunity, they don't implement it. Rather, they engage in deception, in looting, in...
So it's just commitment to collective responsibility and also collective goals.
That's it.
Well, thank you very much, General. Let me come to the Professor. The strategy against corruption today, as it has developed lots of different kind of dimension. The society is getting more and more complex. Just as you said earlier, you can't operate in the 70s and continue with the same ethos, or so to speak, the same mode of operations to the present, the strategy against corruption. And let's move towards winding up this discussion.
The strategy against corruption has the advantage that it has a leadership that is committed. But it is constrained by the legalistic approach. And that I take the position, which I've repeated in many fora, that this has to be complemented with a social scientific approach. For about 2 years, I've been arguing that we do need the Presidential Truth and Restitution Task Force on Corruption that will depend not only on report, but also on intelligence work that will cover not only today, but yesterday and impact tomorrow, that will complement the whole, that will sort of offset the disadvantages or the deficits of the legal. Take the whistleblower approach. It's an element of out-of-the-box thinking, and it's working. But it will work better if it was structured or within a larger system with more comprehensive overall objectives against corruption, yes. Not just money matter. Second point I would like to make before I hand over is that our leaders must do like South Korea, what they did 2-3 decades ago, when the leaders got together, discovered that they were not developing, that corruption was killing the country, and leaders of various colors got together and reached a consensus to kill corruption. Yes. Our leaders have to do that. As of now, we are not doing that. The same leaders are not making the right laws, or even the laws that are there, they are sabotaging it with legal technicalities. They will tell you, for example, that we're a federal republic, but we are made up of states that comes every month to beg for money. That's one lie. Yes. We should not be deceptive against our population. That's a form of corruption. You say, oh, we are a republic, but we spend 5% of local government money on obas, emirs, and ubis. You say we are a secular state, but you have pilgrim boards, Christian and Muslim, all over the place. This, and even what you say in your national anthem and your constitution about being compatriots. How can I be a compatriot to a man who is putting $49 million inside a room, and I'm 18,000 naira a month? Yes. We cannot take, and you say we are compatriots. I mean, these are good examples of saying that the deception between our leaders and the population must stop. It's a form of corruption, and it actually encourages and sustains the corrupt environment.
Well, thank you very much. You were talking about the social system to get things right.
Yes. What I will say is that we should allow institutions to function and grow. As of law, intelligence gathering, including whistleblowing and other systems, are inbuilt in the social sciences that go behind the enactment of the laws. The laws are not just plucked by arbitrary enactment. If the institutions are allowed to grow, yes, then all our apprehensions may be put to rest. Yes. And all these premature judgments that we pass as individuals or people with group interest or other goals, I think they are often joinedist.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
I believe that we should allow the goals to manifest in what we do,
Yes.
and in what we have promised to do.
Yes. Thank you very much, General IBM Haruna, for honoring our invitation. Thank you for sharing with us your wealth of experience. And thank you very much, Professor Kwame Odekule.
My pleasure.
So many dimensions we brought to it, actually. Well, in all, I think is the issue of collective responsibility. And just as they said, all institutions should work in accordance with the established rules and regulations and the democratic tenets. That has been Moment for Fact. I am Aliyu Barau. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.